l'Ukraine des garanties de sécurité solides en gardant en mémoire l'échec du mémorandum de Budapest pour faire en sorte que l'Ukraine ne soit plus jamais envahie. Le 13 septembre 2022, le président Zelensky a reçu un projet de pacte de sécurité préparé par un groupe d'experts co-présidé par vous, messieurs Yermak et Rasmussen. Le président Zelensky vous avait demandé de travailler sur un document proposant des clés pour l'architecture de sécurité d'après-guerre dans l'espace euro-atlantique en prenant des garanties pour l'Ukraine. Ce document de 9 pages appelle les pays occidentaux à fournir le site des ressources politiques, financières, militaires et diplomatiques pour renforcer la capacité de Kiev à se défendre. Il contient une série de recommandations prévoyant notamment une approche à plusieurs niveaux en matière de garantie. Un premier groupe central d'alliés dont l'engagement devrait avoir pour objectif de renforcer l'armée ukrainienne afin que le pays soit capable d'assurer son autodéfense, à la fois de manière dissuasive mais aussi en cas d'attaque, de disposer des moyens de protéger sa souveraineté, son intégrité territoriale et sa sécurité. Je vais donner la parole à nos invités pour qu'ils nous décrivent en détail les propositions concrètes contenues dans ce pacte. Nous aimerions savoir quel soutien et quels investissements concrets sont attendus de l'Union européenne, en particulier en matière d'équipement de l'Ukraine en systèmes modernes et efficaces d'armement, de transfert d'armes, d'assistance dans le domaine du renseignement, de soutien à l'entraînement ou encore de protection de son espace aérien. Les accords régionaux, je pense en particulier à la mer Noire, sont-ils envisagés? J'aimerais aussi, messieurs, que vous nous disiez quelle réaction votre document a suscité depuis sa publication et quel développement ont pu avoir lieu. Auparavant, je vais passer la parole à Urmas Paet, vice-président de la Commission des Affaires étrangères, pour ses remarques introductives. Cher Urmas, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. Dear colleagues, dear guests. Let me also thank our guest speakers on behalf of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. It has been almost a year since the beginning of unjustified Russian war of aggression, and during this year Ukraine has been fighting not only for its sovereignty and territorial integrity, but also for its right to exist as a free nation and to choose a Euro-Atlantic path for its future development and security. If we want to honor Ukraine's brave choice, we need to start talking already now about the security guarantees Ukraine must obtain as soon as it will manage to win this war and re-establish peace on its territory. This is crucial in order to mobilize all necessary political, financial, military and diplomatic resources to guarantee that the horrible crimes we are witnessing every day will never happen again in the future. With that in mind, I strongly welcome the Kiev Security Compact, which includes clearly identified security guarantees and a joint strategic partnership to be endorsed by guarantor allied states and Ukraine. As I had the opportunity to learn in Kiev in December, the goal of this initiative is to enable Ukraine's self-defense to deter an armed attack or act of aggression, and, in case an attack occurs, to ensure that the sovereignty, territorial integrity and security of Ukraine under the UN Charter Article 51 are guaranteed. Needless to say, as a future EU member, Ukraine will also benefit from the EU's mutual defence clause under Article 42.7 of the Treaty on the European Union, and hopefully as a future NATO member, it will benefit from Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. However, I'm afraid that years will pass before Ukraine becomes a fully fledged EU and NATO member. Hence, we need to make sure that the country obtains reliable security guarantees until then. In addition, Ukraine is counting on our support on the 10-point peace formula proposed by President Volodymyr Zelensky during his address at the latest G20 summit. This is another very important initiative on which we need to focus our attention in the coming months. Our guest speakers today are the initiators of the Kiev security format. Mr. Anders Fogh Rasmussen, welcome. And Mr. Andriy Yermak. Mr. Rasmussen was the Prime Minister of Denmark and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's Secretary General, and Mr. Andriy Yermak is head of the Office of the President of Ukraine and a member of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. So it is a great pleasure to welcome you here, and of course I look forward to hearing the latest about the progress you are making on the Kiev Security Compact and how the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, Security Defence Subcommittee in particular could assist you in this. So, thank you very much. I stop here my starting monologue, and I guess we proceed now with our first guest speaker.
Et je passe tout de suite la parole à Andrei Yermak.
Mr. Yermak, please, you have the floor.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for this opportunity and pleasure to speak here in front of friends, real friends. I'm glad to see those of you who have visited us, and I would appreciate the others following with suit. For many, coming to Ukraine is a huge rethinking and attitude-changing experience. Even for those who thought they got it all. Here you understand, Russia did not defeat fascism. It just appropriated. From the very start of the all-out Russian invasion, the European Parliament has been supporting Ukraine in its struggle for freedom and independence. We really appreciate this support. I believe it's a very, very important, not for Europe alone, but for the whole world. What your moral compass is flawless. As recent year experience proves, it is the policy of value, not pragmatic realpolitik, that they can change the world for the better. But for these changes to take place, we have to do a lot more. The Kremlin is planning new strategic offensive and launching the next mobilization wave. Russian generals will send troops to storm Ukrainian cities again, just as they are doing in Bakhmut. Their fighting method is unchanged since World War I. Just drive cannon further into the enemy lines. In Russia, human life has never been valuable, and soldiers are still viewed as extendable. But one should understand clearly and distinctly, anti-war protest will not break out in Russia. Propaganda is still very effective there. Besides, living conditions in the Russian province are so bleak that the Ministry of Aggression and the Wagner's company are not lacking recruits, despite clear prospect of ending up to the black plastic bag. The Kremlin craves to take revenge for the defeats it has suffered this year. It strives to achieve some victory at any cost. Putin says it directly. If he succeeds, propaganda will do the rest, and the Russian population will be ready to suffer further. It will be ready to wage a long war of attrition. Their calculus is very simple. I can explain it in the Ukrainian proverb. Before the fat one gets thinner, the thin one gets dead. It hasn't worked by now, and it won't work later, but they will try hard. The conclusion is obvious. Waiting is wrong. Reacting is no longer enough. You need to be a step ahead. Needs to strengthen the sanction pressure. The 3.5 drop in the Russian GDP is not enough to force it to end the war. And we would highly appreciate the European Parliament's assistance in adopting the 10th sanctions package. Sanctions against Russian propagandists should be expanded right away, too. Otherwise, the TV producing cannot further will defeat the free gain. Urgent and the vital is providing Ukraine the entire range of the weapons. Was its needs today, but also we was it will need tomorrow, as many it may need. The European Union defense industrial complex should be restarted, and the Ukrainian enterprises should be allowed to join. Let's put it clear, time it's not in our side. The longer we war last, the more resources it will be required, the more lives it will be take, the more damage it will be caused to the planet. We must inflict in crushing the quick defeat on the empire-upset regime. Ukraine must fully restore its integrity and sovereignty within internationally recognized borders. For us, it's a precondition for just peace. President Vladimir Zelensky presented the Ukrainian peace formula at November G19 summit, and I spoke about it in Davos. So I wanted to go into detail. Just let me emphasize, the roadmap's basis and priority is international security, nuclear, energy, food, environmental, and military security. To apply to us all. Russian aggressions against Ukraine started 9 years ago. Its full-scale phase has been lingering for the full nine months. This is the largest war in Europe in nearly 80 years. In terms of forces involved, but also in the terms of the number of war crimes committed. And despite the fact that their victims are Ukrainians, the crimes are aimed at the will of humanity. Russia challenges the rules-based world order. Russians believe that Ukraine they are fighting an entire West. We have thousands of testimonies of prisoners of war confirming it. And since they believe it, Russian aggression against Ukraine is really aggressions against the will of the Europe. It is a war against the value that unite us. It is pointless to seek a dialogue with Moscow because it's not able to speak on the equal footing. Some governments still hope that betting on Russia or staying neutral will allow them to realize their state's interest. They are wrong. Russia can't be grateful. Helping it just gives you and slim chances of being eaten last. But it's not for the sure. Russian aggression against Ukraine is evidence that existing general security architecture, which is built on the United Nations chapter, is enabled to guarantee the security of states. The international group, which I have the honor to co-chair with Mr. Rasmussen, has developed the draft of those for Ukraine. We call it the Kyiv Security Compact. My co-chairman, who I am pleased to welcome here, will talk about this initiative in detail. I'll just underline, Ukraine is no way consider the documents as substitute for the NATO membership. It's obvious that both today and in the foreseeable future, with best security guarantees are provided by Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. But we don't just opt to get under the collective security umbrella. Still not a member state, Ukraine contributes much to Euro-Atlantic security. It is high time to recognize Ukraine is eligible. Russians have been seeking to restore their empire, to reconquer Europe, For when invasion of Ukraine, it's a milestone on the way to continental domination. We have paid the ultimate price to disrupt the Melchizedek plot. We are extremely obliged to our European and American allies and our partners around the world to their constant and available commitment to help Ukraine. Our vast and terribly painful fighting experience and your aid combined have ensured the drastic increase in Ukraine forces' combat readiness. As the President Vladimir Zelensky said, Ukraine has already proven capability with the alliance standards. We are real for us on the battlefield and in all aspects of our interactions. Supporting Ukraine now, it's an investment in your current security. But granting Ukraine NATO membership is an investment in your future security. We understand that reaching unanimous agreements is time-consuming. However, time is dwindling resources for all of us. Ukraine welcomes Sweden and Finland joining NATO, and we very regret that this process is being delayed. Security issue should be undeniable priority in today's world. Meanwhile, the Ramstein platform is providing that NATO, together with its outside the security partners, capable of acting fast. It's able to make quick, life-changing decisions. The alliance, as a multi-sided security mechanism of transforming right before our eyes. But without Ukraine, this transformation will not be completed. I think it's obvious to everyone present here, and I hope that you will be Ukraine lobbyists and advocates in this respect, just as you have been until now and many others. Thank you very much for your listening. Slava Ukraini!
Merci beaucoup, André Yermak. Je passe maintenant la parole à Anders Fogh Rasmussen.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to address you today on the Kiev Security Compact. And I'm delighted that its co-author, André Yermak, who we have just heard, is also able to join us. And it's a pleasure to be back in the European Parliament. The European Parliament has been a steadfast supporter of Ukraine over the past year. President Metsola was the first leader of a European institution to visit Ukraine after the invasion. And your committees have consistently called for Europe to do more, both to help the Ukrainian people in these dark moments and help their armed forces win this war. I know that many of you in this room were in Kiev last December, and that you discussed the Kiev Security Compact while you were there. I was also pleased to see that at your last plenary session, the Parliament adopted a resolution calling for the European Union to, and I quote, support the principles of the Kiev Security Compact as an immediate solution for Ukraine's security. I've been informed that you have a new plenary discussion on Thursday before the EU-Ukraine summit. I'm also informed that a resolution will be tabled. I hope that in this final resolution, after you had a chance to look at it, that there will be formulations in this resolution supporting the Kiev Security Compact. Your continued support in this House and in your own member states will be essential for a just peace to prevail in Ukraine. Our meeting today comes at a pivotal moment. The situation in Ukraine remains extremely precarious. Russia continues launching waves of missile and drone attacks targeting Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian infrastructure. The aim is simple, to break down their morale and to break the strong links between the civilians and the military. But despite these hardships, the Ukrainian population remain more determined than ever to resist. Within the European Union, we also see a moment of resolve and unity. Putin believed an energy crisis in Europe would divide us and lessen our support for Ukraine. It did not. He also thought his nuclear rhetoric and ever-changing red lines would keep us from aiding Ukraine. It did not. National leaders are stepping up and giving Ukrainian forces what they need on the battlefield. I've been open in my criticisms when I felt some European leaders were punching below their weight. But I'm also the first to recognize when leaders make the right calls. This is what they did at the last meeting in Ramstein and in deciding to supply tanks. Germany sending main battle tanks to Ukraine. Who would have thought? Denmark giving away all its Caesar artillery pieces to Ukraine. Spain talking about delivering between 20 to 50 Leopards. These are truly historic decisions. Finally, Europe is showing up on the scale needed. However, this is not a moment to pat ourselves on the back. This war is far from over. After having failed to divide and intimidate us, Putin is hoping to outlast us. Russia responded to Ramstein by intensifying attacks on Ukrainian cities. So rather than anticipating a spring offensive, we should prepare for an imminent one. Putin and his commanders know that the battlefield window is closing. They will try to exert the maximum destructive pressure now. They also think they can outproduce us. Ironically, the best way to ensure this war ends quickly is for Ukraine's allies to prepare for a long conflict. It is to deliver more and heavier weapons to Ukraine. That is the best way to bring peace. We cannot allow Putin to win this war. If he gets success in Ukraine, he will continue. And a Putin success in Ukraine would send an extremely dangerous signal to autocrats all over the world. If Putin can get away with taking land from his neighbors, Xi Jinping and others might be tempted to try the same. We must constantly reassess and ensure the Ukrainians have what they need ahead of time. Our approach so far has been too incremental and ad hoc. This leaves us one step behind and has allowed Putin to escalate without consequences. You cannot win a war by an incremental approach. You have to surprise and overwhelm your enemy, and what we need is a long-term cohesive strategy. And on this last point, I would focus, because that is ultimately what the Kiev Security Compact seeks to do. Andrew Yermak and I co-authored the report at the request of President Zelensky. It is one of the key elements of President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. It outlines a robust set of guarantees to ensure Ukraine's independence and territorial integrity for the long term. So Russia can never invade again, and Ukraine can recover and continue its path of European integration. Let me be clear. These guarantees are not a replacement for Ukraine's ambition to join NATO. This is a decision for the Ukrainian people, and by the way, an ambition I support. But a clear NATO membership will take time. The Kiev Security Compact is about enhancing Ukraine's security now and for the future. It is based on the principle that Ukraine's sovereignty depends first and foremost on its ability to defend itself. The formula is to make Ukraine capable to defend itself by itself. For this, Ukraine needs to maintain a strong military, one capable of deterring and defeating Russia on the battlefield. This will only be possible through a sustained, multi-decade commitment from Ukraine's allies. Under the Kiev Security Compact, guarantor countries would commit to help Ukraine in 4 major areas. Firstly, build a very strong Ukrainian military without any restrictions on size and strength, strong enough to withstand any future Russian attack. Secondly, enhance the sharing of intelligence between Ukraine and its allies. Thirdly, sustain intensive training missions under both EU and NATO flags. And fourthly, build a strong and modern defense industry in Ukraine so Ukraine can produce efficient weapons herself. This support would come from a core group of Ukraine's allies. A broader group would then commit to imposing automatic, so-called snapback sanctions on Russia in case of further aggression. The Kiev Security Compact does not pretend to replace NATO's Article 5 mutual defense clause. It proposes instead reinforced self-defense to ensure peace. It also avoids the mistakes of the past. Previous security guarantees for Ukraine proved worthless, particularly the infamous Budapest Memorandum. This provided only negative security guarantees. It prohibited the signatories from threatening or using military force or economic coercion against Ukraine. But when Russia did exactly that, the consequences were minimal. The Kiev Security Compact does the opposite. It provides positive security guarantees, giving practical material support to enhance Ukraine's ability to defend itself. Putin must understand that the democratic world's commitment to Ukraine will not falter, that his war is futile. Adopting a strong set of guarantees sends exactly that message. We must build on the unity established in Ramstein last month. We must think about what comes next. And I think the European Parliament should be the central voice in this. Your continued support will be vital to make the Kiev Security Compact a reality, to provide a framework under which Ukraine can recover, rebuild, and continue the path to EU membership, so that anyone who addresses this room in years to come will also be addressing Ukrainian members. Madam Chairman, thank you very much, and I'm ready to take all your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Anders Rasmussen. Je vais d'abord passer la parole à notre collègue Witold Waszczykowski.
Thank you, Natalie. Mr. Yermak, Mr. Rasmussen, I'm here. It's good to have you with us. I fully support your work about the future position of Ukraine vis-à-vis European Union and NATO. I understand that Kiev Compact is supposed to lead to the full-fledged membership of Ukraine to NATO, not to the provisional and substitutional solution. However, Ukraine's situation is very difficult today. As you rightly mentioned, Russia is determined to conduct the war and escalate the war. So I wonder what, from your experience of your work on this compact, we can or you can use today. There are two definitions of victory. One is to stop the war and to freeze the conflict like in 2015. The second, and I understand you support the second, is to win the war and beat the Russians. These two definitions lead to the two different solutions to deliver a weapon and help Ukraine. Deliver on the defensive weapon or deliver offensive weapon. So how this split affect your work? You don't work in a vacuum, of course. You have to respect the opinion of other leading countries participating in this exercise. So what is the reaction of other leading countries? What is support for your vision? And what are the chances to implement some of your objectives right now, as soon as possible? Thank you.
Merci. Je passe maintenant la parole au rapporteur permanent sur l'Ukraine, Michael Gahler.
Yes, thank you very much, and welcome, Mr. Rasmussen, and welcome, Mr. Yermak in Kiev. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to get yet another input for our deliberations and our discussions, how to make Europe and Ukraine and us, all of us, more secure after this dreadful war. And I'm happy to say that this Parliament has been always ahead of the wave of decisions, so meaning that I recall that we had a resolution already before the outbreak of the war where we welcomed those countries who at the time before the war already delivered weapons. And so far, I think that was only one of the points where we have argued that support is necessary to Ukraine and remains necessary, and especially as Mr. Putin has not lost or dropped any of his objectives, and that is the end of Ukrainian statehood, of course. And insofar, I, in principle, would say that I support the points that have been made here. What is necessary, that it has a strong military, has to have one, and we need to enhance intelligence sharing. We need to continue intense training, and they have to rebuild their strong defense industry. They had an industry already, and there are not, of course, largely destroyed. I wonder how we can get the discussion forward amongst our governments. I mean, it's as it is. I just read, Austria and Hungary just decided we will not deliver weapons. Okay, it's their decision. But that shows already some hesitation or some breakup of unity, and which will, of course, please Mr. Putin. So I wonder where we, as a parliament, we can make our minds heard. But it is not, at the end, it's not about us, but it is about the governments. And insofar, I would wish that we use, and you use also your input and your influence on our respective governments, that they understand one thing: there cannot be a return to business as usual with this Russia. I think that is something that must really sink into the minds of the politicians and the decision makers in our capitals. With this Russia, there is no return possible to business as usual, and that is the real question: how to get unanimity in this regard. And in order to get the Ukrainian message over, I'm finishing, and that is where I address myself to Mr. Yermak, and he knows what is coming now. I think there cannot be enough Ukrainians here in Brussels to make their point, and that is why I once again reiterate my point to say I think it is not a good decision to block or to reserve the travelling of members of the parliament to only very restricted meetings, but to allow anybody who wants to travel from the parliament to convey the message. I think that is important, because otherwise I have the feeling that the current UCAS in this regard is not quite constitutional. Thank you.
Merci, chers collègues. Vous êtes nombreux à vouloir prendre la parole, donc je voudrais vous demander de faire un effort de concision. Pour les S&D, je passe la parole à Tonino Pizzula.
Merci, Madame President. Honourable speakers, thank you, of course, for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to see you again, Mr. Yermak, after our meeting in Kiev in December. Unfortunately, the context of our meeting did not change for better. Almost a year since the start of Russian aggression, we witnessed daily attacks on your critical and civilian infrastructure, increasing number of casualties. Of course, thank you for presenting the Kiev Security Compact as a way of formalizing coalition of supporters of Ukraine through security guarantees. Support of the EU has been unprecedented. With a positive decision on Leopard tanks, now the discussion is shifting towards fighting jets. This House supported the delivering all the necessary support on multiple occasions. One particularly interesting aspect of your proposal is a core group of allies would make clear commitments to support Ukraine's armed forces, while a broader group would provide non-military guarantees built around sanctions mechanisms. My question: could you provide more information on practicalities of this idea and the level of support it is receiving? Second topic: even though our issue today is a Kiev Security Compact, I also would like to ask you, Mr. Yermak, about domestic political situation and your anti-corruption actions. Coming from Croatia, we had direct experience with post-war transition and so-called war profiting. President Zelensky highlighted domestic fight against corruption and protection of state assets as a national priority, together with defending the country as absolute priority. We saw some actions in that regard. Could you share your assessment on this? Thank you very much and good luck with everything.
Merci. Pour Renew Europe, Petras Austrevicius.
Thank you, Chair. Let me to thank both Mr. Yermak and Mr. Rasmussen for their very great work. I mean, they did in making this document. Congratulations. It's a great, concise and clear guidelines explaining very well to those who are interested and follow this situation. And let me to quote one line from your document. Given its unique geopolitical position, the most effective security guarantees lie in Ukraine's capacity to defend itself. I think this is a very central message. I mean, we can get through it because, Ukraine is not a part of NATO. Ukraine has no collective security guarantees, although we should think about this in one way or another. So that's why, to my mind, you rightly mentioned before, two things matter the most. It's time and team. Time to provide as much as possible, because any delay to supply Ukraine with needed weaponry and ammunition is more lives lost on the battlefield and among civilians. And team, building up partnerships and mobilizing all willing civilized countries which are in position to support Ukraine with what is needed now. But let me, Mr. Rasmussen, to ask you, since guarantees are needed now, not in future, not only through the defense capacity being strengthened by all means, but maybe thinking about something else, extending our, let's say, political thinking towards new partnerships. And my question is whether there is any possibility to have, for example, NATO Europe having more partnership agreements with those countries which are willing and able to cooperate. And it's not just about probably Ukraine, but I'm looking at Sweden, for example, as one example as well. If Turkey is to block accession of this country, absolutely illegitimately, to my mind. But maybe we need some kind of passarella principle-based partnership with those countries to support their security guarantees. Thank you.
Merci. Pour les Verts, Reinhard Bütikofer.
Reinhard.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thanks also to our two guests and presenters. The basic starting point, as I understand, of the Kiev Security Compact lies in the analysis that negative guarantees have not worked and would not work in the future. And I agree with that assessment. For the time being, of course, we have to concentrate everything we do on contributing as best we can and with whatever is needed to help Ukraine winning on the ground against the expected new Russian offensives and in order to liberate more of the occupied territory that is still under the control of Russian armed forces. As regards the positive guarantees that you foresee in your document, which we welcome, I think there are two sticking points that I find not clearly explained. One point is this. In NATO and within the EU, we're trying to develop a system of collective security, whereas this thinking in the document basically focuses on a coalition of the willing of individual countries. How do you reconcile those two different logics? And the second point is, and you will not be surprised, both President Biden the Chancellor of Germany and other leaders have argued time and time again that they would not allow NATO or NATO member states to become warring parties in this war. How do you deal with that concern in the context of the compact? Thank you.
Merci. Pour ECR, Jerzy Buzek.
ECR, Jerzy Buzek.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you. I'm here. Thank you for your speeches at the beginning. Secretary General, thank you for being back in European Parliament after some break. It's a great possibility for us. I've got, as a matter of fact, very simple question. I think on behalf of our citizens, ordinary citizens, because we can say that our European unity in helping Ukraine is a great success. On the other hand, I hear more and more a question, why does NATO, but also individual member states, members, delay with its military support to Ukraine? How to explain it to ordinary citizens? We can understand as politicians that for many reasons, of course, it is possible to understand, but it will be more and more important question because we know what is going on in Ukraine, and for our citizens is not easy to understand. Thank you very much.
Merci. Désolée d'avoir dit ECR alors que c'était PPE. Pour ID, et là il n'y a pas de doute, Robert Zimiok.
Robert Zimiok now.
Ja, danke schön. Es erfüllt mich mit großer Sorge, wenn ich hier die Diskussion und die Pläne hier verfolge. Wir befinden uns auf einer Warslide, wir befinden uns auf einer Rutsche, wo es letztendlich nur zu einem großen Knall kommen kann. Wir ziehen nichts mehr anderes in Betracht. Wir sehen von der Bandbreite totaler Krieg bis hin zur Selbstaufgabe keinerlei weitere Möglichkeiten offensichtlich mehr. Ich vermisse und ich habe nicht einmal in den letzten Monaten etwas von Verhandlungen gehört, die wir dringend wieder auf diplomatischer Ebene aufnehmen müssen. Wir sind dieses Menschenleben, dieses Blutvergießen hier zu beenden. Das ist mir einfach ganz ehrlich gesagt zu viel Kriegsbegeisterung, und wenn ich das bei unserer deutschen Geschichte betrachte, ist das ziemlich schief gegangen. Und ich glaube, dass wir hier diese Verhandlungen als Option auch mal auf den Tisch legen sollten wieder, bevor wir weitergehen. Denn in dieser bisherigen Verlauf dieser kurzen nicht mal einjährigen Krieges sind wir in Deutschland zum Beispiel von der Lieferung von 5000 Stahlhelmen sind wir jetzt bei den Leopards gelandet. Wo werden wir in einem Jahr stehen? Werden wir Flugzeuge liefern? Werden wir Bodentruppen liefern? Was auch immer. Hier wurde eben von der Teilung von militärischen Military Intelligence gesprochen, was ein hochgradig gefährliches Element ist, denn da überschreiten wir auch nach internationalem Recht eine rote Linie. Diese Linie heißt, sobald das durch diese Informationslieferung der Gegner zu Schaden kommt, ist man Kriegspartei. Und ich möchte auf alle Fälle Schaden von den europäischen Nationen abwenden. Und deshalb fordere ich auch meine Kollegen nochmal nachdrücklich auch mal das Wort Verhandlungen, diplomatische Lösungen nochmal in den Wortschatz aufzunehmen. Punkt 1. Punkt 2. Und ich möchte auch gerne wissen, ob die NATO denn das auch vorhat, diese einfachere Lösung, sagen wir, oder diese Lösung ohne Blutvergießen zu suchen. Oder sieht sie das als alternativlos? Und auch mit dem Wort alternativlos habe ich ein Problem, wenn ich an Merkels Flüchtlingspolitik denke. Also alternativlos ist nichts in der Politik. Zweite Frage. Korruption. Europol warnt davor, dass Waffen, die hier vor allem Kleinwaffen bis hin zu Luftabwehrraketen auf dem Schwarzmarkt aufgetaucht sind. Haben wir irgendeine Kontrolle über das Material, das wir geliefert haben? Gibt es Kontrollmechanismen? Und zweite Teilfrage dazu bei der Korruption.
tying in with that corruption question, I'm wondering about what happens with all of the money that we are sending to Ukraine. We're shoveling it across to Ukraine. Is it just disappearing into individuals' pockets? I'm not saying this just as a rhetorical question, because even President Zelensky has had to admit that there is a real problem with widespread corruption, and I think we need to pay more attention to that. So those were two questions essentially, and I would really like to hear your answers.
Nous allons faire un deuxième tour de questions.
Let's go round the second set of questions. Let me just remind you that defending protecting a country which has been attacked does not qualify as an act of war. Providing supplies does not constitute an act of war. It is only Russian propaganda that would make that claim. Andrius Kubilius for the EPP.
Well, thanks very much to both speakers. Really great job. And definitely, Ukraine is doing, incredible job in defending not only itself but also all of us. And if to go back into the history, it's obvious that NATO back in 1949 was created to deter and to defend, Europe against authoritarian Russia or Soviet Union expansion and invasion. And now Ukraine is doing that job. NATO was created for collective security. Ukraine is doing it alone with its self-defense capabilities, which you, with Security Compact, are looking how to increase. But it looks like, that those very good ideas which you put into Security Compact are, designed because still we are not able to speak about real membership of Ukraine in NATO, which from my point of view would be a big benefit also for NATO and for Ukraine itself. And I understand that last year it was looking like, a little bit not believable that we can start to speak about Ukraine membership in NATO. I think that this year could be different, because there are only two reasons, from my point of view, and Mr. Rasmussen perhaps knows much more about NATO, but at least from my point of view, there are two reasons why we are hesitating, when we are talking about Ukrainian membership in NATO. One is that, still some people are afraid to provoke Putin reaction. I can argue that exactly opposite. Ukrainian membership in NATO would strengthen possibility of Russia to become a democracy, because that would, kill, the dream to restore empire among Russian people. Second, of course, the reason is that, maybe member states do not want immediately to jump into the war. But that is the question of how to invite Ukraine to become a member of NATO. It's not that Ukraine should become member of NATO immediately today. But that is what is the real solution. So my question is, are we going to real solutions at some time?
Merci. Pour les S&D, Sven Mixer.
S&D, Sven Mixer, please.
Yes, thank you very much to both of the speakers. We have been saying time and again that we will support Ukraine for as long as it takes, and obviously there's a logical connection. How long it will take will directly depend on how much and how quickly we give. Now, until a year ago, I think most of us worked on the assumption that Russia is essentially deterrable, that it was a rational player. Now, the aggression launched by Putin and the way he has been conducting the aggression, I think, seem to suggest that he is not entirely rational, or at least that he is ready to take much more pain and far bigger losses than we previously thought in order to achieve his imperial ambitions. And that means that deterring Russia will incur much higher price than perhaps we thought previously before this aggression. You suggested in the compact that we would need to help Ukraine build up defenses that would be capable of deterring Russia.
So far we have been dragging our feet about delivering a few dozens of battle tanks and a few fighter planes. So would you perhaps like to suggest as to what and in what quantities we need to give to Ukraine in order for it to be able to actually deter Putin's Russia? And I personally tend to agree with Andrius Kubilius in that perhaps helping Ukraine to get into NATO and under the collective security umbrella would be, an intellectually more compelling way of providing long-term security to the country and also to other countries, because building up Ukraine's defenses would not necessarily help to provide security for countries like Moldova and others, the Caucasus countries, who are also living under the threat of an expansionist, revanchist, imperialist Russia.
Merci. Pour Renew Europe, Javier Nart.
Now for Renew Europe, Javier Nart.
He escuchado con profunda preocupación cuando usted ha mencionado que Ucrania tiene que ganar la guerra. ¿Realmente piensan ustedes que Ucrania puede vencer a una potencia como es Rusia, que además es una potencia nuclear? Me deja francamente muy preocupado. ¿Piensan que se puede tomar Crimea a través del estrecho de Perekop o tendrán que hacer un desembarco tipo Normandía? ¿Con qué y dónde?
Can they go via the Straits, or they have to have a Normandy-style invasion? We need to be realistic. Secondly, when you say that Ukraine has to focus on self-defense via high production of weapons, in order to produce weapons there has to be buyers, because you can't maintain a defense industry just on domestic purchasing. You said you want to see the export of these weapons, because that's needed for economic justification. This is a war that Ukraine cannot win and Russia cannot lose. What we need to do is to arm Ukraine so that negotiation is a real negotiation with Russia in a position of weakness. However, to see a full Ukraine victory, I think that's ridiculous. I'm concerned because that means we would have to declare war on Russia with the blood of the Ukrainians, and I think this is morally indefensible. If we think that the victory of Ukraine will be as a result of the implosion of Russia, creating Afghanistan in Europe, and so that we can now see that this situation, it will be hundreds of thousands of lives lost. If they don't win the war, then what will we have? A permanent war. For how long? And in what manner will it be conducted? I think we are looking at a position which means that we are up against Russia via the blood of the Ukrainians. Concludes, can we beat a nuclear power using a country which has a much lower population and lower capacity? I think I'm extremely concerned by this initial approach to win this war, which is unwinnable.
À nouveau pour le PPE,
once again for the EPP, Ryan Basescu.
Mr. Basescu.
Well, thank you, Madam President, Secretary General. I will repeat what I said by a few months. What time we hesitate to supply Ukraine with the necessary military weapons, military equipments, being able to attack the logistic bases, the aviation bases, and the Russian ships from the Black Sea, all situated on the Russian territory, Ukraine don't have any chance. In fact, the Russians are destroying daily the Ukrainian infrastructure, and on another hand, the Ukrainians are not supplied with the necessary weapons to attack the logistic bases which are on the Russian territory, aviation bases which are on the Russian territories, and the ships which are on the Black Sea. In fact, we have to be clear that without of such measures, with such deliveries, Ukraine don't have any chance. This is my message. We have to be more courageous, because on the end of the day, the Russians are attacking Ukraine from the Russian territory, not from the Ukrainian territory.
Merci. Pour les SND, Elena Yoncheva.
Please.
Je vous remercie, Madame Loiseau, pour me donner la parole. Je ne sais pas si M. Ermak est en ligne. Est-ce qu'il peut répondre aux questions?
Yes.
Mr. Ermak, the first question is for you. According to the German newspaper Die Welt, Bulgaria provided a third of Ukrainians' arms needed during the last year, and the Ukrainian government confirmed this news. The Bulgarians learned about this great role of our country with big emotions. And political newspaper based in Brussels even wrote, Bulgaria secretly saved Ukraine. So can you provide more information, Mr. Ermak, which part of the sent weapons was extremely important and helped to save Ukraine? And the second question is to Mr. Rasmussen. Mr. Ermak just said time is not on our side. So how far and quick do you expect NATO be even more engaged in the war in Ukraine if sending of the tanks do not turn the tide of the war, and as well the eventual sending of military plans? If so, is it necessary, will be necessary to, according to your opinion, to send military troops from NATO member countries? And from where do you expect such assistance first? Poland, Romania and Bulgaria could be among the first ones. And please, Mr. Rasmussen, be as frank as possible. And is Europe entering in a war with Russia, or we are already at war, as was said by the Foreign Minister of Germany? And do we have a strategy as a European Union, as NATO members, any strategy how to stop this war? Thank you.
Merci. Pour Renew Europe, Dragos
Tudorache, please.
Thank you, Chair, and most welcome to both distinguished guests and speakers. One question is linked to a discussion on victory. We've heard several colleagues exposing different versions of what victory looks like, and my question is whether in your discussions, the initiators of the compact group, whether there is already a clear understanding of what victory looks like, and how do you think we can get to a broader shared understanding of what this victory looks like, because it's quite essential to actually what we need to do and the actions we need to take to get there. And this leads me to the second question. You said, Secretary General, yourself, that we have to surprise and overwhelm if we want to, these are your exact words, to surprise and overwhelm Russia. And I fully agree. But do you think that what we are currently doing and supplying Ukraine with is capable to surprise and overwhelm Russia, or rather to just get by? Thank you.
Et finalement, pour les Verts, Sergei Lagodinsky.
Thank you. The second round of the Greens. Very briefly, I think this discussion is very useful, and I thank the authors of the paper. But what I'm concerned about is that in our discussion, the immediate needs of Ukrainians and the vision of what and how we want to secure Ukrainian security and Ukrainian future are mixed together. And the way I understand your proposal is a vision of what will come following the war. And I think we all agree that following the war, our relationship and the relationship that we understand will be for Ukraine vis-à-vis Russia will be a relationship of containment and deterrence. And if we agree that we can only live with Russia under Putin by means of containment and deterrence, then we must make sure that Ukraine can deter. And I understand this paper as a roadmap towards a Ukraine that can deter Russia from the future. From that perspective, the comments that I heard from Mr. Zimyok are irrelevant, because diplomacy cannot deter Russia as we know it. And we all agree that diplomatic instruments are important, but they are not part of the tool basket that you are offering, because they did not deter Russia so far, and they will not deter Russia in the future under Putin. So from that perspective, I would like to see it, and I would like to ask you the question of the time axis that you are proposing. What elements, because some elements that you're proposing are already in work, for example, our help in terms of military equipment, training, etc. What elements do you think can be implemented already now, and what elements should be implemented following the victory of Ukraine over a Russian aggressor in whatever form we understand this victory, or following this war? So what is, I see the vision, but I don't see the roadmap. What would be the roadmap that you propose? Thank you very much.
Bien, après ces nombreuses questions, je vais redonner la parole à nos invités pour y répondre, en commençant par Andrei Yermak, s'il est toujours connecté avec nous.
First of all, thank you very much for everybody. If I can, I will answer, because a lot of questions I will answer in Ukrainian. You have the translation.
First of all, I would like to thank you all, especially those who said that at the background of the conversations, should we give or should not we give assistance, we have to forget about it. We have to be united. We have to help Ukraine to get a victory in this war. I am very thankful for you. These words are especially important for us nowadays. Secondly, I would like to very clearly, yet again, and I have talked about it many times also during our meetings where our colleagues from the European Parliament were in Kiev, we do not have any scenario how the victory will look like that will not include 100% recovery of territorial sovereignty of Ukraine within the internationally recognizable borders. Territorial integrity 100%. All other proposals with regard to the negotiation until last Russian soldier leaves our country are Russian propaganda. Natalie, thank you very much that you openly mentioned that. Also, I would like to say that under the President Zelensky, and I think, I am sure, I am convinced, because this is the position of the Ukrainian people. We won't have any Minsk format, any other new Normandy formats. We won't have it. These you can and have to understand very well. Those with skepticism, they say, is it possible to win over Russia? Is it possible to be victorious over the nuclear state, etc.? What I would like to say is the following. Already for 11 months, we do not talk. We demonstrate you with facts that we did not only deter and stop this aggression, we are starting to liberate, step by step, all our territories. And we will liberate them clearly and fast if and when we have the necessary weapon. I would like you to understand, and unfortunately, those who still did not have an opportunity to come to us, I invite you. Please understand, your position will change 100%. For example, the Prime Minister of Denmark that was yesterday, with President visited Mykolaiv in Odessa, frankly spoke about it. Even though she was already during this war in Kyiv, but what she saw in Mykolaiv in Odessa region just surprised her a lot. I would like to say that we deal with the modern fascism, and I am not mistaken. Fascism, that's what I meant. If someone does not believe me, please look again through the history of the World War II. Look through the history of concentration camps, because they do exist nowadays on the occupied territories, on the territory of the Russian Federation. And again, I call upon all of you. Who is in doubt? Please come to Ukraine. We will provide you with a secure and safe stay, but you will be able to see everything with your own eyes. Regarding NATO, during my statement I said that today that's the most secure ally NATO is. And I would like to mention, somebody mentioned that when NATO was created in 1949, NATO already at that time as organization was mentioning the huge threat from the side on the Soviet Union. Later on, it became threat from Russia. And I would like to remind you that for a long period of time, during the last dozens of years, we had this axioma that we cannot have like equivalent on the same level Russia and NATO allied countries, and many of people were stressed. They were really thinking that this is like the second biggest army in the world. It's impossible to fight against them. And the policy was based upon that. Please do not mistake. Do not repeat this mistake. We, Ukrainian, we showed you that we fight for our values. Today, we are the best matchmakers for NATO. We have shown where NATO is and where Russia is. Russia understands very well they cannot dictate any conditions to any of the NATO countries. Please, let's together keep that safe. Because today, thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, citizens paid for it. Ukrainian children's life lost because of it. And I am convinced that the membership of Ukraine in NATO will only strengthen this alliance. We cannot lose the country that works today and fights today. The people in the entire world will be convinced that NATO is the strongest organization in the world. Natalia, thank you very much that you reminded me on one of the priorities of President Zelensky. And I want to mention that he was very successful businessman. And the only goal that he went to be a president, it's to change this country. And please look at what Ukraine has done under his presidency, candidacy to the European Union, how much he did. And we're talking about the wartime. We're talking here about construction of the anti-corruption system. And what I like to mention, that everything what it's told about the level of corruption in Ukraine is, I think, overblown. Because if we talk about the very corrupted country, as the Russian propaganda states a lot about it, such a corrupted country would not be able to fight and stand strong for almost 12 months. months. That's why, despite the skepticism, even some political parties that now call themselves European parties, the President Zelensky had the initiative to fight against oligarchs, and today the realization of this law is one of the points that the European Commission told us to do, and we will realize it, believe us. And that currently you see that anti-corruption cases we have in our courts. All this is only in support that even during this war, our community, our people are united around our president, around our victory. We are cleaning ourselves as a society, but please do not overblow the size and volume. It's only in favor for Russian propaganda, because they do want this to be a case, but it's not the truth. Everything what is happening today, and I can tell you even what kind of institutions are those. We have very strong anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine. I don't think many countries have such institutions in the world. Talking about the countries, other countries, there are many countries, but I'm using this opportunity, would like to say that we are thankful to all of you. We won't forget you, never. We will remember all our friends, our partners, that during those practically 12 months support us, help us. There are many countries. I thank all of you. I thank your governments. I thank your leadership. And first of all, your people, your societies, because we all know how simple people support Ukrainians in many European countries, in majority of the European countries, because they already understand that Ukraine is a part of the European family. And believe me that we work 24/7 to this goal, so it will become a reality as soon as possible. We will have in one day the summit, European Union, Ukraine. We are well prepared for it. We are expecting our partners and friends to come to us. We expect to have good decision to be adopted during this summit. And as a conclusion, I would like to say that during these 12 months, historical things happened. And one of those events is unconditional unity of the democratic world around Ukraine. It is really truth. But also, I would like to say that we are united around our values. Unfortunately, we're starting forgetting about them. But that the evil and fascism will not win. We need to keep this unity, because this is a forepost that the free world will win. And Ukraine is now at the forefront of this fight. Please do not forget about it. Please, I would like to also thank to all of those who mentioned that every day, unfortunately, we are losing our people. Today, we live in the conditions like, for example, today, 3 times. For a couple of hours, we had air raids, sirens wailing. People living in Ukraine currently, they do not know what today will bring them. They do not have electricity. They do not have water. But believe me, I am frank with you, 100%. I'm telling you, Ukrainians will keep on this road. We will win. And yet again, I would like to thank all those who believe, like we believe, in our common victory, and convince those who are still skeptical about it. Believe me, you are wrong. Russia will not win in this war. Ukraine will be victorious. Thank you very much. Glory to Ukraine.
Merci André Yermak pour ces paroles fortes et pour être assuré du soutien, de l'admiration et de la gratitude de la plupart d'entre nous et des opinions publiques de l'Union européenne pour le courage avec lequel l'Ukraine se bat contre le pire impérialisme de notre époque. Gloire à l'Ukraine. Je passe maintenant la parole à Anders Rasmussen pour répondre aux différentes questions qui ont été posées.
Merci, Madam President. And thank you very much for your very interesting, very relevant questions. It's actually a great pleasure to be back and in the audience also see some well-known faces with whom I have served in different capacities over the years. I'll do my best to quickly answer all your questions. Mr. Bachikowski asked me, how does victory look like? And others have actually touched upon the same issue. It's very easy. Victory is to kick all Russian troops out of Ukraine. That's how it looks like. Because I can assure you, as long as you have Russian troops on Ukrainian soil, there'll be a conflict. And we need peace to start rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine. And that's why the only off-ramp for Putin is out of Ukraine. It's very simple. And to that end, we need to deliver to the Ukrainians everything they need to achieve that goal. You also asked me what has been the reaction to the Kiev Security Compact. I traveled to Washington twice, before and after the midterm elections. I spoke with representatives of the administration as well as members of both parties in Congress. I left Washington a bit more optimistic than I arrived. The administration is in principle in favor of what is in the Kiev Security Compact, and both political parties are very supportive, apart from a small minority on the Democratic left and a small majority on the Republican right. But apart from that, there is a strong bipartisan support for the principles in the Kiev Security Compact. So I left Washington encouraged, but still we haven't seen real progress. And this is the reason why my plea is for the European Parliament to issue a new strong declaration of support for the Kiev Security Compact. And I think you have a chance already on Thursday. And it leads me to an answer to Mr. Gahler, who asked me how to speak with governments on this. I agree, that's important. How can we convince governments that the Kiev Security Compact is an important element on the way forward? I can tell you what I have tried to argue. Firstly, the Kiev Security Compact is necessary to issue the necessary security guarantees for Ukraine so that investors dare to actually put their money in the reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine. You need a long-term security guarantee to create an attractive investment environment. Secondly, we have a strong interest in building a strong and stable Eastern European partner like Ukraine as a bulwark against a still more aggressive Russia. And by that, we can create more stability and long-term peace on the European continent, which eventually will also leave more room for maneuver to address the real long-term global challenge, China and the Indo-Pacific. In addition to that, I have argued, I think the Kiev Security Compact can also build the bridge within NATO to avoid a split at the upcoming summit in Vilnius, because no doubt there will be a discussion on Ukrainian membership of NATO. You have allies that are strongly in favor, you have allies that are skeptical, and you have allies that are 100% against, for the time being at least. But I think to avoid that split, we have the Kiev Security Compact, which de facto is a codification of what we are already doing, but with a more long-term strategic perspective. That's the way I have tried to convince governments that it is in our self-interest to sign the Kiev Security Compact. Mr. Pittula asked me about sanctions. How will that work? Well, it would be far too much to go into all the details, but I can tell you that Japan, Australia, South Korea are among countries that have showed strong interest in joining a sanctions regime. And I think it would be dangerous to abolish sanctions too early. But once we think that conditions have been fulfilled for lifting or modifying some sanctions, then we have to monitor the situation, and if Russia repeats its attack on peaceful neighbors, then they will automatically be reintroduced. So that's actually the essence of this. Mr. Burikofer asked me if NATO is part of the war. No, NATO is not part of the war. Will we consider individual NATO allies as part of the war? Yes, in a way, yes. We shouldn't hide that, because according to Article 51 in the UN Charter, every country that is attacked has the right to defend itself, of course, but it also has the right to request assistance from allies to help it counter that attack. And that's exactly what the Ukrainian government has done. So we shouldn't be surprised that we more or less are parts of this war to defend Ukraine, and it is in full accordance with international law. Mr. Butek, I don't understand why we have delayed the delivery of weapons. The fact is that those delays are exploited by Putin. While we are debating and discussing, he's accelerating without any consequences. He started attacking civilian infrastructure in Ukraine back in October, and we didn't do anything. So, like you, I don't understand it, but I appreciate that finally the right decision was taken in Ramstein and a couple of days later by the German government. Mr. Simniuk argued, we need negotiations to end the war. Well, maybe that depends, but I don't think it will be negotiations around a table that will determine the outcome of this war. It will be the position on the battlefield. So, we have to deliver all the assistance that the Ukrainians need to strengthen their hands when they feel that the time is ripe for negotiations. It's not for us to push the Ukrainians to engage in premature peace negotiations. There is one easy way to stop this war. Russia should stop attacking Ukraine. It's very easy. If Russia stops the war, stops fighting, there will be no war. if the Ukrainians stop fighting, there'll be no Ukraine. It is as easy as that. And that's, of course, why it's a key component of President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, that the Russian troops should leave Ukraine before you can even start negotiations. Mr. Kubilius asked me about NATO membership for Ukraine. Why hasn't it happened already? Are we afraid of provoking Putin? We could decide now without it entering into force immediately, but maybe later. But actually, we have used that formula. Back in 2008 in Bucharest, we decided that Ukraine will become member of NATO. Without end date, but it will happen one day in the future. And that decision still stands. But of course, it is a bit complicated. If we were imagining giving Ukraine membership of NATO now, they would be covered by Article 5, which means that the US and other big allies would be obliged to help Ukraine against Russian attacks. That would really engage NATO directly in a war with Russia. And this is the reason why even I, who is strongly in favor of Ukrainian membership of NATO, think that it would be better to introduce the Kiev Security Compact and really pledge to give Ukraine firm security guarantees as a first step, which could pave the way for a future membership of NATO. Because the Kiev Security Compact would really be a bulwark against future Russian attacks. Because you can be sure Russia, as we know Russia today at least, will continue its aggressive behavior. So we need that bulwark. And that's why we need security guarantees anyway. And on top of that, down the road, Ukraine can become a member of NATO. Mr. Mexer asked me, what would it take to deter Russia? That's also very easy. All the weapons that Ukraine needs. Everything. And that's why I think it has been a weakness through this war that leaders within NATO and other allies, partners, have been too eager to tell the world and tell Putin what they exclude to do. So by that they have given Putin too much room of maneuver, in my opinion. I wouldn't exclude anything in advance. There might be things we would never do, but why tell Putin? The most efficient deterrence is to keep your adversary uncertain of how you will react, when you will react.
Even troops on the ground and even nuclear weapons? Sorry to interrupt.
Ukraine has signed the non-proliferation treaty. Actually, this whole story started back in 1994. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of nuclear weapons were left back in Ukraine. But in 1994, Ukraine signed the non-proliferation treaty and gave up the nuclear weapons, actually handed them over to Russia in exchange Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum where they pledged not to attack Ukraine. We all know what happened. Do you think that would have happened if Ukraine had still the nuclear weapons? No. Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear weapon, and Ukraine doesn't want the nuclear weapons. So we can exclude that option. I take that for a given. But apart from that, I don't think we should exclude anything. Okay, but because let's realize, appeasement with dictators does not lead to peace. On the contrary, it leads to war and conflict, because the dictator's appetite is endless. Now, Mr. Hart find it ridiculous to think that the Ukrainians can actually win the war because the Ukrainians are up against a nuclear power. Again, I would say, never ever give in to nuclear blackmail. Those who give in to nuclear blackmail are condemned to live in slavery under the stick and pleasure of the nuclear master. So we should never ever accept that kind of blackmail. I wouldn't like to live in a world ruled by the tyrants who possess nuclear weapons just because they have nuclear weapons. So we have to abide by their dictates. Never ever. That's why I always say, peace is precious, but freedom is priceless. We should always remember that. And you cautioned against a permanent war. I can assure you, if we give in to Putin, we will have a permanent war in Europe, because Putin will not stop. If he gets success in Ukraine, he will continue. First Moldova, then Georgia, and eventually the Baltic states, in particular Lithuania, because he wants to create a transit, a Russian transit to Kaliningrad through Lithuania. That's how I see it. Mr. Bacescu, no. We don't supply Ukraine with the necessary weapons. And you're right. Russia is attacking Ukraine from Russian territory. So obviously we should provide the Ukrainians with long-range missiles. Obviously. I fully agree. Yeah, I think, Madam Yoncheva, I have already answered your questions about NATO engagement. NATO as such is not engaged, but NATO allies are, of course. And I don't think you will see NATO troops deployed on Ukrainian soil. And anyway, it is in accordance with international law that individual NATO members help Ukraine.
So it's possible. It's possible. You think it's possible? It could
don't you think it would be better to ask for the floor, because we are running out of time?
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. No, I don't. To be brief, no, I don't think you'll see that. Mr. Lagutinsky, yes, you requested a roadmap. I think we are already doing sharing of intelligence. We are already doing training not on Ukrainian soil but in NATO member states. So that's already done. I think for later, to help Ukraine build a strong defense industry, that will take place at a later stage. The first point, to build a strong military, that's in a way part of our weapon deliveries now. So you might argue that's already happening. So strong degree, the Kiev Security Compact is codifying what is already going on. And let me stress, I think it's important to sign the Kiev Security Compact now and not make it dependent on an end to the conflict, because that would de facto give Putin yet another argument to continue the conflict, to avoid the entering into force of the Kiev Security Compact. That's why we should sign it sooner rather than later. So let me just finish this by saying that now we will have to act while we are debating and discussing. Life is lost in Ukraine. And I think we have a responsibility to put a quick end to this war, and the more weapons, the heavier weapons, the faster they are delivered, the faster we can bring this war to an end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rasmussen. Thank you very much, Mr. Yermak in Ukraine, in Kiev. And of course, Ukraine must win and restore full control over her territory. And of course, Europe has to do everything to support Ukrainian people. And of course, first of all, security and full security for Ukraine is absolute must, and that's why also Kiev Security Compact to be implemented is a very urgent issue. But of course there are also lots of many other issues, like creating international tribunal, like using and find a way how to use Russian assets to finance the rebuilding of Ukraine, and a lot of other important issues. So that I'm really glad that the European Parliament has been very clear and vocal in all these issues, and of course the European Parliament will continue to support Ukraine and Ukrainian people. Once again, Mr. Rasmussen, Mr. Yermak, dear colleagues, thank you, and we have to stick together and keep supporting Ukrainian people till the very positive end of this tragic aggression. Thank you. Thank you.